The kitchen was filled with the soft ticking of the wall clock, the kind of silence that settles in a house after years of routine. I sat at the table, pen poised above a stack of papers, my son across from me with that familiar, persuasive smile. It was the same look he'd worn as a boy when he wanted an extra scoop of ice cream or to stay up past bedtime. Now, he was a grown man, but the expression hadn't changed. The documents between us looked official, stamped, and highlighted in all the right places. He'd already walked me through them twice, assuring me it was all straightforward, just a bit of paperwork to make life easier for both of us. "You've done enough, Dad," he said. "Let me take care of things now. You deserve a break." I was about to sign when my phone vibrated on the table. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. After all, what could be more important than this moment with my son? But old habits die hard, and I glanced at the screen. It was Raymond, my accountant, a man who had managed my finances for over a decade and never once called me at this hour. I excused myself, holding up a finger to my son, and answered. Raymond's voice was low and urgent. "Don't sign anything tonight," he said, skipping any greeting. "Come see me first thing tomorrow. Alone. And before you do, check your savings account. Look at the last 8 months." Then he hung up. I returned to the table, my mind suddenly elsewhere. My son asked if everything was all right. I nodded, telling him I was just tired and needed to sleep on it. He gathered the papers, slipped them into his leather folder, and told me not to worry. After he left, I stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the street, the taillights fading into the night. It had been just over a year since my wife passed away. 41 years together, and then, suddenly, I was alone. The house felt emptier than I could have imagined. I missed the small things, the way she hummed while making coffee, the way she'd squeeze my hand when words weren't enough. Her absence was a hole that nothing seemed to fill. My son had stepped in, calling more often, visiting on weekends, bringing his family along. He helped with errands, took me to appointments, and sat with me on sleepless nights. I told myself I was lucky to have him. I told myself I'd raised a good man. For 30 years, I'd run a small electrical contracting business. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I'd built it from the ground up, paid off the house, and saved enough to retire comfortably. My accounts were modest but secure, managed by Raymond, who I trusted implicitly. After my wife died, my son offered to help me keep things organized. He knew the numbers, the passwords, the routines. I thought it was just another way he was looking out for me. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't check my account like Raymond had suggested. I told myself it was probably a misunderstanding. I told myself my son was just trying to help. I told myself what I needed to believe to fall asleep. The next morning, I drove to Raymond's office, a familiar brick building downtown. I'd been there countless times, knew the creaky step on the staircase, the way the sunlight hit the waiting room in the morning. Dina, Raymond's assistant, usually greeted me with a smile and a bowl of hard candy. Today, she just nodded and told me to go right in. Raymond didn't offer coffee. He simply turned his computer screen toward me. My savings account was open, the transaction history stretching back months. I blinked, trying to make sense of the numbers. Nearly $47,000 gone, siphoned off in regular intervals, 3, 4, sometimes 5,000 at a time. The money had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Raymond clicked through to the details. The account belonged to an LLC my son had set up 8 months ago, right after he'd first offered to help with my finances. I sat there, numb, as Raymond explained what he'd found. He'd noticed the first transfer in October and called my son, who claimed I'd authorized it for home repairs. Raymond believed him at first, but as the withdrawals continued, he grew suspicious and started documenting everything. He showed me another account, my investments. Another $12,000 gone, withdrawn online using my credentials, approved through my email. My son had set up my new phone for me, handled the passwords, made it all seem so simple. Raymond slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a detailed record of every transaction, every date, every amount. 6 pages, single-spaced. $59,000 missing. I didn't cry. I felt something heavy settle in my chest, but no tears came. I thought about the night before, the pen in my hand, the trust I'd placed in my son. Driving home, I took the long way, past the fields and the tree line, trying to make sense of what I'd learned. $59,000 was a lot, but it didn't explain why my son needed power of attorney. He already had access to my accounts. There had to be something more. That afternoon, I called Patricia, the attorney who'd helped me buy my house years ago. I explained the situation and asked her to check the property records. She called back before dinner. There had been an appraisal on my house 2 months earlier, requested by a real estate firm I'd never heard of, on behalf of a buyer I didn't know. The appraisal valued my home at over $300,000. My son had found a buyer for my house. If I'd signed those papers, I would have lost everything: my home, my savings, my independence. I sat in my kitchen, the same place where my son had smiled at me just the night before, and tried to process the truth. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the man who'd helped me through my grief, had been planning to take everything I'd built. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. I did what my wife would have wanted. I waited until I could think clearly. I called Patricia and Raymond, told them to hold off on any action until I understood the full picture. I needed to know why. My son had a good job, a family, a life that seemed stable. What could have driven him to this? I reached out to Walt, an old friend and retired detective, and asked him to look into it quietly. 2 days later, he called back with answers that would change everything. Walt's call came early on a Saturday, his voice steady but carrying the weight of bad news. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I've been digging, and there's more to this than you thought," he said. I braced myself, gripping the phone a little tighter. Walt had always been the kind of man who told the truth straight, no matter how hard it was to hear. He explained that my son's life wasn't as simple as it looked from the outside. Over the past 3 years, he'd racked up nearly $70,000 in personal debt, credit cards, a private loan, and money owed to a couple of individuals with reputations that made Walt uneasy. "Not the kind of people you want to owe money to," he said. The debt had started with some bad investments, then spiraled out of control with gambling, mostly online, hidden behind the privacy of a phone screen. His wife, Walt told me, didn't know the full extent of it. She thought they were just dealing with the usual ups and downs of family life. As Walt laid out the facts, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The picture I'd held of my son, responsible, caring, the one who stepped up after his mother died, was starting to blur. The debts explained the missing money, but not the rest. Why the power of attorney? Why the rush to sell the house? Walt had an answer for that, too. One of the private lenders was connected to a real estate broker. The plan, as best as Walt could piece together, was to use the power of attorney to sell my house quickly, likely at a price below market value, in exchange for wiping out a chunk of my son's debt. The rest of the money he'd been siphoning from my accounts was probably going to keep the wolves at bay until the sale went through. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun creeping across the floor, and tried to process it all. My son had been living a double life, hiding his troubles behind a mask of concern and helpfulness. The late-night phone calls, the weekend visits, the offers to help with my finances, they all took on a different meaning now. I wondered how much of it had been genuine, and how much had been calculated. It was a question I knew I'd never fully answer. I thought about confronting him, about driving over to his house and demanding an explanation. But every time I pictured it, I saw my wife's face, calm and steady, reminding me to wait until my anger cooled. She'd always believed that decisions made in the heat of emotion rarely led anywhere good. So I waited. I called Patricia and Raymond, updated them on what I'd learned, and asked them to keep everything quiet for now. I needed to be sure of my next steps. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I moved through them in a kind of fog, going through the motions, but never fully present. I kept replaying conversations with my son, looking for signs I'd missed. Had there been a hint of desperation in his voice? Had he ever asked for help directly? Or had he always just offered to help me, turning the tables so I wouldn't suspect a thing? Raymond, ever the professional, continued to gather documentation. He compiled every transfer, every withdrawal, every email authorization. Patricia dug deeper into the real estate side, confirming that the appraisal had been ordered without my knowledge and that the buyer was connected to one of my son's lenders. The evidence was piling up, and with every new detail, the reality became harder to deny. One evening, as I sat on the back porch watching the sun dip below the trees, I thought about the years I'd spent building my life. The early mornings, the long days, the sacrifices made so my family would never have to worry. I'd always believed that hard work and honesty would be enough, that if I did things right, my son would follow my example. Now, I was faced with the truth that sometimes, even when you do everything you can, things still go wrong. I remembered teaching my son to ride a bike in the church parking lot, his small hands gripping the handlebars, his face lit up with determination and fear. I remembered the pride I felt when he finally took off on his own, wobbly but free. That memory felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The next step was clear, even if it was painful. I needed to protect what was left. I met with an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse. I brought every document, every printout, every note from Raymond and Patricia and Walt. The attorney listened carefully, asked questions, and then told me, without hesitation, that what had happened was criminal. Fraud. Exploitation. Words that felt heavy and foreign when applied to my own son. He explained my options. I could file a police report, start the process of recovering what I could, and let the law take its course. Or I could try to handle it privately, risking that my son, or the people he owed, would find another way to get what they wanted. It wasn't really a choice. I'd spent my life believing in accountability, in facing the consequences of your actions. I couldn't let this go, not just for my sake, but for the sake of everyone who might find themselves in my position one day. That night, I sat in the quiet of my house and thought about what it meant to be a father. I thought about love, about loyalty, about the difference between helping someone and enabling them. I realized that protecting my son from the consequences of his actions wouldn't save him. It would only teach him that he could always count on me to clean up his messes, no matter how big they got. The next morning, I filed the report. The police took the case seriously, thanks in large part to the meticulous records Raymond had kept and the clear evidence Patricia and Walt had gathered. They opened an investigation, tracing the money, the emails, the real estate dealings. My son's wife was interviewed. She was shocked, devastated, and, from what I could tell, genuinely unaware of what had been happening. She took the kids and went to stay with her parents, answering every question the investigators asked. I didn't feel anger toward her. She'd been deceived, too, just in a different way. The betrayal was wide and deep, touching everyone who had trusted my son. The day my son was arrested, I wasn't there. I was sitting in my usual booth at the diner, the same place I'd gone for breakfast every week for years. When the call came, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with grief. The waitress, who'd known me long enough to read my moods, simply refilled my coffee and gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. That small act of kindness undid me more than anything else that day. In the days that followed, people who knew enough of the story began to ask questions. Did I regret turning him in? Did I worry about what his children would think? Was there another way? I thought about those questions a lot. I still do. But I knew, deep down, that the only way forward was through the truth. My son hadn't made a single mistake. He'd made a series of choices, each one taking him further from the man I thought I knew. Love couldn't fix that. Only honesty could. The days after my son's arrest moved slowly, each one heavy with a mixture of relief, sorrow, and a strange emptiness I hadn't expected. The house was quieter than ever, the silence broken only by the occasional ring of the phone or the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. I found myself drifting from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, straightening picture frames, searching for something to anchor me in the present. The routines I'd built over decades, morning coffee, afternoon walks, evenings on the porch, felt unfamiliar, as if I were living in someone else's life. The investigation unfolded with a thoroughness that surprised me. The officers assigned to my case were respectful, patient, and methodical. They combed through every document Raymond had provided, every email, every bank statement. Patricia's records on the house were invaluable, showing clearly that I had never authorized the appraisal or the sale. Walt's notes filled in the gaps, connecting the dots between my son's debts and the real estate broker who had been circling my property like a vulture. I was called in for interviews, asked to recount the timeline again and again. Each time, I felt the story harden into something real, something undeniable. There was no room left for doubt or wishful thinking. My son had orchestrated a plan that would have left me with nothing. No home, no savings, no safety net. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had always believed that family was a kind of insurance against the worst the world could throw at you. Now, I understood that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those closest to you. My son's wife, Emily, became a regular presence in my thoughts. She called me once, her voice trembling, to apologize for not seeing what was happening. She told me she'd moved in with her parents, that the children were confused but safe. I reassured her as best I could, telling her that none of this was her fault. She had been deceived, just as I had. We spoke about the kids, about how to explain things to them in a way that wouldn't leave scars. I told her to be honest, but gentle. Children, I said, are resilient, but they remember the truth even when it's painful. The legal process was slow, as these things always are. My son was charged with multiple counts of fraud and elder financial abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes, no last-minute confessions. He was quiet during the hearings, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. I attended only when necessary, sitting in the back, out of sight. I didn't want to see the look on his face, didn't want to risk the possibility of pity or anger clouding my judgment. Raymond and Patricia worked tirelessly to recover what they could. The bank froze the remaining funds in the accounts my son had accessed. The real estate transaction was halted before any paperwork could be finalized. In the end, I was able to reclaim most of what had been taken, though about $11,000 was gone for good, lost in the shuffle of transfers and withdrawals that couldn't be traced or reversed. It stung, knowing how hard I'd worked for every dollar, but I reminded myself that it could have been so much worse. The house was still mine. My independence, though shaken, was intact. Throughout it all, I found myself thinking about forgiveness. People asked if I could ever forgive my son, if I would visit him, if I would try to rebuild our relationship once the dust settled. I didn't have easy answers. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a single act. It's a process, a series of choices made over time. Some days, I felt a flicker of compassion for the boy he once was, the boy who used to run into my arms after a scraped knee or a bad dream. Other days, the betrayal felt too fresh, too raw, and I wondered if forgiveness was even possible. I also thought about what it meant to be a parent in the aftermath of such a breach of trust. I had spent my life teaching my son about responsibility, about the importance of honesty and hard work. I had tried to model those values every day, believing that they would take root and guide him through his own life. Now, I was forced to confront the reality that sometimes, despite our best efforts, our children make choices we cannot control or understand. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old photographs, I came across a picture of my son as a teenager, standing next to me in the driveway, both of us grinning after fixing up his first car. I remembered the pride in his eyes, the sense of accomplishment we shared. That memory, like so many others, felt bittersweet now, a reminder of what we'd had and what had been lost. In the weeks that followed, I leaned on the people who had shown up for me when I needed them most. Raymond, ever steady, invited me for coffee every month, checking in not just on my finances but on my well-being. Patricia called to update me on the legal proceedings, always ending the conversation with a reminder to take care of myself. Walt stopped by with stories from his days on the force, making me laugh in spite of everything. My grandson, 8 years old and full of questions, became a bright spot in my life. He would call on Saturday mornings, asking if he could come over to help in the garage. We'd spend hours tinkering with old tools, building birdhouses, or just talking about how things worked. He didn't understand the full story, only that his father had made some bad choices and that there were consequences. His mother was honest with him, in a way that made sense for a child his age. I made a promise to myself that I would always be there for him, that I would show him what it meant to be trustworthy, to keep your word, to stand by the people you love without losing yourself in the process. As the legal case moved toward its conclusion, I found a kind of peace in the routines I'd once taken for granted. I returned to my favorite diner, sat in my usual booth, and watched the world go by. The waitress, who had seen me through the worst of it, always greeted me with a smile and a fresh cup of coffee. Those small acts of kindness reminded me that life goes on, even after the deepest wounds. I began to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened or pretending it didn't matter. It was about accepting the truth, learning from it, and choosing to move forward anyway. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide how to live in the present. I could choose to be open, to trust again, carefully, but not fearfully. The hardest part, I realized, wasn't losing the money or nearly losing my home. It was losing the version of my son I thought I knew. But in that loss, I found something else, a deeper understanding of myself, of the limits of love, and of the strength it takes to stand up for what is right, even when it means standing alone. Time, I've learned, doesn't heal everything, but it does soften the sharpest edges. In the months after the dust settled, I found myself living in a world that looked the same but felt fundamentally changed. My house was still mine, the walls lined with photographs and memories, but the air inside was different, quieter, heavier, sometimes peaceful, sometimes lonely. I moved through my days with a new kind of awareness, one that came from having nearly lost everything I'd spent a lifetime building. The legal process wrapped up with little fanfare. My son was sentenced, the details of his punishment a matter of public record but private pain. I didn't attend the final hearing. I'd already said everything I needed to say, not with words, but with actions, with the decision to protect myself, to draw a line, to let the consequences fall where they belonged. People asked if I felt closure, but closure is a myth. What I felt was acceptance. This was my life now, shaped by choices, his and mine. I kept up my routines, not out of habit, but as a way to reclaim my days. Thursday mornings at the diner became a ritual of quiet reflection. The waitress, who had seen me through the worst of it, never pried, just offered a warm smile and a steady presence. Those small gestures mattered more than I could have imagined. They reminded me that kindness still existed, that trust could be rebuilt, even if it took time. Raymond and I continued our monthly coffees. Our conversations shifted from numbers and legal updates to stories about our lives, our families, the things that made us laugh. He always asked how I was doing, really doing, and I found myself answering honestly, even when the answer was complicated. Some mornings were still hard. There were moments when a memory would catch me off guard. A song on the radio, a photograph tucked in a drawer, a father and son in a parking lot, and I'd feel the ache of what was lost. But those moments became less frequent, and when they came, I let myself feel them without shame. My relationship with my grandson deepened in ways I hadn't expected. He became my shadow on weekends, eager to help with projects in the garage or just sit and listen to stories about his grandmother. He asked questions, sometimes hard ones, about his father, about mistakes and forgiveness, and what it means to do the right thing. I answered as honestly as I could, careful to separate the man from the choices he'd made. I told him that love doesn't mean ignoring the truth, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold someone accountable. I thought often about the lessons I wanted to leave behind, not just for my grandson, but for anyone who might find themselves in a situation like mine. The world is full of people who will tell you that family means unconditional trust, that blood is thicker than water, that loyalty is everything. But I've learned that loyalty, when misplaced, can become a kind of permission, a silent agreement to look the other way, to let harm go unchecked. My wife used to say that loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you, and I finally understood what she meant. If there's one thing I hope others take from my story, it's this: your instincts matter. If something feels off, if you find yourself hesitating before signing a document or handing over control, listen to that voice. You don't owe anyone blind trust, not even those you love most. Protect what you've built. Ask questions. Keep someone in your corner who isn't afraid to tell you the hard truths. For me, that was Raymond, a friend whose only loyalty was to the numbers and to my well-being. I was lucky. I had people who stepped in, who noticed when things didn't add up, who cared enough to make a difficult phone call on a Tuesday night. Not everyone is so fortunate. That's why I tell my story, not out of bitterness, but out of hope that it might help someone else avoid the same pain. I recovered most of what was taken, but the real recovery was something deeper. I learned that being alone doesn't mean being helpless, and that growing older doesn't mean giving up control. I learned that love is not a shield against betrayal, but it can be a foundation for rebuilding, for choosing to trust again, even if it's just one small step at a time. My son's absence is a wound that will never fully heal, but I refuse to let it define the rest of my life. I still have my home, my memories, and the chance to be the kind of grandfather my grandson deserves. I show up for him, not just with gifts or outings, but with honesty, consistency, and the willingness to answer his questions, even when they're hard. If you're reading this and see yourself in any part of my story, know this: you are not alone. There is no shame in protecting yourself, in drawing boundaries, in demanding honesty from the people you love. The world will try to tell you that forgiveness means forgetting, that love means accepting anything. But real love, lasting love, means telling the truth, even when it hurts.